welcome to a very special episode of Wide Angle this week. We have with us Shahinda Ismail, the Executive Director of the Maldivian Democracy Network, and somebody who's been an outspoken voice for human rights and the freedom of speech, the right to have democratic participation in the political process for its people. But she's been hounded for her views, both in real life and, of course, on social media, goes without saying. To talk to us about her experience, she joins us on Wide Angle. Thanks very much, Shahinda, for being with us. You spent some part of early 2018 out of the Maldives, and that was because of intimidation and real active threats to your life. Tell us a little bit about what happened.
Yes, it was following a tweet I posted about. Well, it said that other religions exist in the world because Allah allows for it. This was in response to a statement by President Yamin when he said that he was not going to allow for any other religion. 7 or 8 days after I posted the tweet, and after I posted many other tweets since that tweet, there was an article on an online news website called the Vagutu Online, which has its affiliations to the government as well, calling me an apostate for having tweeted about it. And the interpretation that the news article made of the tweet was that I was calling for that I was calling on the government to allow other religions in the Maldives. But I still don't understand how I become an apostate by calling, even if I did, for other religions to be allowed. But anyway, 6 articles followed in the span of about 5 to 6 hours, and it was all about how apostasy should be punished by death. And the comments on these articles by the public are very violent, calling to execute me and to kill me, and various other violent threats.
So you felt it was safer to leave, essentially?
I did feel that I should leave for the time being, at least, because I have had experiences where some of my friends and people that I have worked with have been attacked and even murdered after threats on social media such as this. So I did not want to take a chance and left for some time. These articles also included a statement, a press statement by the Islamic Ministry, calling on authorities to investigate the tweet, and then it was followed by a statement by the police, who said they had launched a criminal investigation into what I had said, and they actually said that they were investigating me for anti-Islamic or irreligious comments. But I was never asked for my word. I was harassed on social media as well. I got direct threats on Twitter.
Right. So in a sense, this had sort of sanction, top-down sanction, all the violence and the hate against you on social media. You're saying the Islamic Ministry also issued a statement, and the police launched this investigation. Over the this also coincides roughly around the time where emergency had been called in the Maldives, because that was in end January, early February, somewhere around that time.
The emergency was called shortly after I returned to the Maldives. Going back to that incident, I mean, it's not the first time that I or my colleagues and some other friends have been threatened and harassed, especially on the online spaces. And there have been various instances where people have labeled us as anti-Islamic, and it's baseless accusations, but this kind of profiling of human rights defenders as people who work against religion. It is a trend that we have been seeing in the region as well, and it is the same in the Maldives.
Do you think that because Maldives is, they say, 100% Muslim, there is a religious unity bill or law in the country that leaves no room for minorities, that there is this sort of radicalism about religion, very strong Islamist views on how the citizens of the Maldives should practice their faith? And is it because everyone talks about the Maldives also now in the context not just of the political troubles but also the radicalization and terrorism related concerns in the Maldives? So does it all tie in together?
It does. It does tie in at different places as well. We do have a religious unity law, and the constitution also prescribes that in order to be a Maldivian, we have to be Muslim. And I think part of the conflict, if I might call it, is the denial by the Maldives to recognize that it does have a minority now. Mm-hmm. But yes, the constitution and the law calls for 100% Muslim country, and even within Islam, it stipulates narrow following in terms of the sects within Islam as well. The penal code has a section on criticizing Islam, mm-hmm. Which was used against me, and it was, I believe, the first time that it was used against a Maldivian. There was also a policy that was published by the government around April this year, which said that which clustered apostasy, jihad, violence in the name of Islam, and mocking Islam into into this cluster that had that would face a penalty of being ripped of mm-hmm. citizenship. It has not become law as yet, but the policy has been published.
So when there is, on the one hand, this law or the policy, as you say, that there's a cluster of offenses against the religion, so to speak, how does that tie in with the fact that there is a violent extremism or a radicalization taking place? Because when you talk about countering violent extremism, everyone talks about the Maldives as a country that's got government policies in place that are going into, small communities where radicalization may be taking place. How does that tie in with the fact that you also have these laws, but there is this sort of, it's a combustible situation in a sense?
It is, absolutely. There have been so many contradictory actions and statements made by the state. For example, this policy that recognizes jihad and violence in the name of Islam, but when incidents of violence take place, for example, when Yamin Rashid was murdered, mm-hmm. The claims by investigators were that it was not an organized violent group, but rather isolated individuals who had misconceptions about religion that attacked Yamin. It does not make sense. It does not make sense for the government to have such a strong policy if the government does not believe that we have a problem of violent extremism. Mm-hmm. We have seen at least 6 individuals who have been charged with terrorism for activities that have been alleged to have the involvement of violent extremism, right. Religion used as a tool, at least 6 people have been acquitted at the courts. So it makes you question the will of the state to prevent or counter these actions or these groups at all.
So they're acquitted, and yet there are statistics that indicate at least 200 Maldives nationals went and joined the Islamic State.
At various times.
Over the last few years,
yes.
Yes. So there are these contradictory pulls and pressures taking place. You made the point a short while ago about how when it comes to religious fundamentalism, and in Maldives it happens to be a Muslim, 100% Muslim or a Muslim majority population, as the case may be, but it's a problem that is stemming from the top as well as the radical groups within that are pushing forward a fundamentalist agenda. But you said that it's also happening elsewhere in the region. Were there any countries you were talking about specifically? We're seeing what's happening in Bangladesh right now, for example, with Shahidul Alam. Are you referring to Bangladesh? Any other countries?
I was actually referring to Bangladesh. I've had interactions with organizations and human rights defenders who've been working there. So I am aware of the situation there as well. But something that I would like to highlight is that when it comes to violent attacks and threats and targeting domestically, especially of individuals, human rights defenders or people who are liberal and vocal about their opinions. When a person is labeled as anti-Islamic or as an atheist or someone or as an apostate, it creates this space where there are groups of people who feel that they can do whatever they want with these people. But Islam does not allow for one Muslim to accuse another of apostasy just like that. And the other thing is, even with this policy about mocking Islam, there are sections in the penal code about mocking Islam. Who decides what mocking is? There is no clear definition of what mocking Islam is. It can be interpreted by anyone in authority.
It can be argued that the challenges that you're talking about are the challenges of governments and countries that have not had a strong association with democratic principles and democratic freedoms. The Maldives had one president for 30 years. We've seen what is going on currently in the system, and there are challenges to, are there going to be enough candidates in the coming elections to even have an open and wide election with representation. So these are also challenges that come as a result of the fact that it is a state defined by its religion.
It is, and it is also widely accepted. And when the issues that you have touched on around a democratic process, for example, elections. Now, we have an Islamic studies curriculum, which say that democracy and human rights is a challenge to Islam. It is right there in the books that I used to teach our children. There is an open campaign calling to boycott the elections this time because democracy is shirk, that it is against Islam. And we have not seen any action taken against either of these
statements in the publication.
Exactly.
So you're in Delhi right now. I'm sure you've met a lot of people in the city as well. And many will say what's happening in the Maldives, as you also are saying, it's happening in many countries in the region. It's also part of a global trend of right-wing populism, fundamentalism of politics, religious identities taking center stage in a manner of that we're seeing even in India. And yet you're here, India and the Maldives have an association, as rocky as it might be right now. And you're looking at countries like India to also make statements and step in and in a sense, try and put pressure on the government. Do you think it's possible?
Well, I do hope that it is possible. The trends that we see in this kind of a situation is that there are very few states who will criticize their neighbor or another because of the situation back home, because there may be a lashback. But despite this scenario, we have seen statements being made. We have seen some amount of criticism arising around the situation.
Well, there have been statements by India about raising concerns. So would you like to see more such statements from Delhi?
Yes, of course, we would. And I mean, the statements that Prime Minister Modi has made is very encouraging. It makes us very hopeful that there is room for more statements or for maybe offers of support or even action into specific areas that the Prime Minister has noted in his statements.
One final question for you, Shahinda, before we wind up the interview. A lot of the threats that you received were on social media, where people have the space to say whatever they might want to, and governed by, God knows whose regulations, but social media companies' regulations more often than not about what constitutes free speech and what constitutes hate speech. So threats and intimidation fall in that gray area sometimes. And yet, as a human rights defender, one of the challenges for you is to defend spaces for free speech as well. But that very space for free speech is yielding some of the most violent threats today. So how do you tackle that contradiction?
Yes, it is true that these spaces have its advantages and disadvantages, and we do try to engage with the platforms when people are harassed or violently threatened. It is a very slow process, and it does not yield immediate results either. But despite the difficulties in operating on these online spaces, I think it is still a free space where we can express ourselves, where we can communicate with the community at large. And I, for one, am not leaving those spaces just because somebody decided to harass me or threaten me. I do hope that the platforms do formulate strategies that are stronger in ensuring that the spaces are used responsibly.
And your work on the ground in the Maldives continues in communities, because you do a lot of this work in communities, in your own local communities as well, talking to people about the benefits of non-violent ways, I suppose, of communicating their political or religious thought. Is there resistance when you go into communities with strategies to counter violent extremism then?
No, there isn't. This is what I was getting at. I mean, we have been in different parts of the country, and we have been addressing sensitive issues. We have been addressing very strong opinions that people of authority have made, and yet it is heartening to know and to see that there is so much space and room for engagement with the communities.
And is there a sort of a gender perspective to this as well? Is it easier to communicate with women? Are the attacks against women worse than those against men who do the same kind of work that you do?
There are some dynamics that can be seen, but I wouldn't say that, you know, one is worse than the other. I mean, we have had people killed, but the threats that women receive are more sexually based,
Right.
while the threats or the kind of harassment that men receive may be slightly different from that. But the way I see it, a violent threat is a violent threat, and that's how we address the issue.
Shahinda Ismail, thanks so much for talking to us. The challenges that you face both in the virtual world and in the real world, I think they're quite similar in many ways. So good luck to you as you move forward. Thanks for talking to The Wire. Thanks.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.